In this presentation, I will be discussing cross-species transmission, or CST, of pathogens. In particular, I will be discussing how and why cross-species transmission occurs, why it is important, and how we can work to prevent it. Cross-species transfer, also known as spillover, occurs when an infectious pathogen, like a virus or bacterial agent, is transmitted from one host species to a different host species. Zoonosis involves the specific cases of CST that occur when a human is infected with a disease transmitted from an animal. This photo shows a couple of animal species that have been linked to CST in humans. Bats, birds, cattle, livestock, rats, and primates have all been responsible for infections in human populations for various reasons. I chose to look into this topic after reading Richard Preston's book, Crisis in the Red Zone, which is about the outbreaks and possible origins of the Ebola virus, which is widely believed to have originated after the consumption of bats in West Africa. Preston explains this in his book briefly, but I wanted to look further into this topic and explore why viruses might jump between species. Here are a couple examples of recognizable zoonotic diseases. According to the CDC, 6 out of every 10 infectious diseases in humans are spread from animals. 3 out of 4 new or emerging infectious diseases come from animals. Zoonotic diseases are responsible for an estimated 2.5 billion cases of illness and 2.7 million deaths worldwide each year. There are 3 key steps in order for a CST to occur, but there is a lot that needs to line up for the virus during that time. The first step in this process of trial and error on the virus's part is achieving contact with the new host at a concentration level high enough to provide opportunities for infection. Farming and animal-based agriculture is one avenue of infection because workers are constantly exposed to livestock that could be carrying disease. Swine flu and avian influenza most likely began because of close contact with pigs and poultry, respectively. Deforestation makes contact between humans and wild animals much more common, and this increases the possibility for CST as well. Climate change increases the strain on wildlife as well, which can lead to biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss leads to the funneling of disease-carrying pests closer to humans. When there's a high degree of exposure to wildlife, there is a greater chance that a virus will find and take advantage of an opportunity for infection when it presents itself. The next step that the virus needs to undertake occurs if a successful infection has happened. Once the virus establishes itself in a new host, it must be able to hijack the host cells and use them to replicate. If the virus is unable to do this, it will stop here and spillover will not occur. The virus must have the correct molecular traits to bind with the host cells and gain access to its inner workings. The virus also must remain hidden from the body's natural defenses so that it can continue replicating within the host. If the virus continues to replicate successfully within the host, an outbreak could occur. Studies have found that viruses could even go as far as to alter their host's stress and immunological function on a genetic level in order to avoid a detection. I'll take a slight detour here to explain the reasons why viruses engage in CST. Viruses are constantly trying to expand and replicate further. A new host species that is unfamiliar to a specific virus and its mechanisms is a huge opportunity for replication and genetic resources. Imagine that when a virus achieves a successful CST, that it is like an invasive species being introduced to a new environment. The environment is not equipped to handle this new species. There are ample resources, free of competition, and there are few predators, or in the case of the body, natural defense mechanisms, to limit the spread of the invader. For genetics, a recent study has found that viruses do most of their evolving during CST events. This is likely due to the need to adapt rapidly to the new host environment in order to survive, which leads to new mutations emerging and thriving. Adaptive evolution is the final step of CST and occurs after the virus is able to successfully replicate in the new host. The virus now adapts to the new environment until it can easily be transmitted throughout a population of the new host species. The virus can now begin tweaking itself so that it can better infect, be transmitted, and evade the host's immune responses. This is often the time when an outbreak will occur. Something that is worth mentioning is the role that phylogenetics play in the ease of CST. The more phylogenetically similar an old host is to a new host, the easier it will be for the virus to make the cross-species jump. This is because the natural defenses of two similar species are easier for a virus to adapt to. For example, it will be easier for a monkey virus to infect a human than a bat virus because of the immunological similarities between primates. As mentioned previously, human actions like farming, deforestation, and climate change have significantly contributed to the emergence of more and more zoonotic pathogens. The prevalence of these pathogens will only increase as time goes on unless something significant is done about it. The reason that this issue is so important can be seen with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which seems to have been a case of CST involving unregulated consumption of bushmeat or exposure to exotic animals. We've seen that a major pandemic can cost millions of lives, it can tear down the global economy, and it can thrust the world into a standstill. Unless something is done to combat the harmful effects of CST, outbreaks similar to COVID-19 could become more commonplace in our world, which could lead to similar or worse effects than we have already seen. There are ways in which human society can prevent or at least slow down the increasing prevalence of zoonotic diseases and CST. One way that researchers at Stanford University say this problem can be prevented is by establishing buffer zones around rainforests as a means to prevent human and wild animal interaction. These buffer zones can also promote biodiversity, which can decrease the likelihood of pests moving towards humans. Reduction of forest degradation will also allow these natural ecosystems to thrive and reduce the chance of CST in humans. Another way to reduce the risks of CST would be a reduction in the use of industrial agricultural practices. These practices put undue stress on animals and humans, which creates greater risk for transmission and contraction of disease. Converting to smaller organic farms can reduce the number of animals that people interact with, as well as maintain a higher concentration of healthy animals. Lastly, an interesting way to fight this issue would be to utilize foreign aid. Resources can be sent to communities that are at greater risk of CST spillover events. By providing resources, there is less need for these people to put themselves and their local populations at risk when entering forests and wildlife-dense areas. The future remains relatively uncertain for CST proliferation. If humans cannot change their actions, the possibility of more pathogen outbreaks becomes increasingly likely. There are ways to combat this problem, however. Instead of treating the symptoms, we need to work on fighting the problem at its roots. Climate change and deforestation are problems that cannot be ignored going forward. Understanding the process by which CST occurs is also very important so that we may attempt to stop this problem at every level of development. While it can be done, the question is whether or not humanity is willing to compromise on the continued safety of our world.